Is any marriage beyond hope? Where is God in the seasons of darkness in our relationships when our prayers seem to go unanswered? Can God bring healing to a marriage no matter how broken it seems? Joining me now to share their personal story of trial and transformation are Mark and Janet Soppitt, founders of Living Well Life Coaching. Welcome to 100 Huntley Street, Janet and Mark.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. You have such an incredible ministry today, but an incredible journey of transformation and healing in your marriage. Mark, take us back to 2005 when your family first immigrated here from the UK, you and Janet, and you have 5 kids.
Yeah.
What was your life like in the UK prior to moving here to Canada?
Well, we had met in Oxford, and kind of following that, I went into the police for 5 years. Janet trained as a teacher. We started having our kids. And then after 5 years, we felt the call into pastoral ministry and went and pastored in a church just outside of Oxford for 7 years.
That's wonderful. And then you began to feel this call that God was calling you here to Canada, a new land, a totally different place.
Yeah.
And Janet, there you are. You've got 5 kids, and I think you were pregnant, were you? Or?
No, the youngest was 12 weeks old.
Okay. Yes. All right. What was that like for you as a mom and a wife, answering this call that you both sensed God was calling you here to be part of a church that needed growth and strengthening as a pastoral kind of role? But what was it like for you to move here with 5 kids?
It was really hard, and I wouldn't recommend it unless God speaks really clearly, and he had. So we stepped out in faith and came. But for me, it was way harder than I imagined. I just had a baby. I didn't have the regular support. I had 5 children, so that was a new thing for me. And I really struggled with culture shock. I didn't expect or anticipate it, but it was so difficult. And it really took me 2 years. And then I needed to get some help to help me deal with that, to be able to move on in living in Canada. Yeah.
And then after that 2-year mark, did you start to adjust okay?
Yeah, so we got some help. We went away and had some ministry. And then actually very shortly after that, my dad died very suddenly, which I thought would throw me back into a tailspin. But I'd learned so much through those couple of years that I was prepared to deal with the grief and the loss and all of that. Yeah, so things then got better. Or we thought they were going to.
Well, right. So you were feeling like you were in a good place, Janet. But Mark, as you're starting to really sow into the church ministry that's happening around you and in the church you're serving in, the church is thriving, but you're starting to struggle significantly. What went on for you in that early season?
Well, I think one of the things I felt with Janet going through her own struggles were I felt quite lonely in that, because we'd worked so well together in pastoring in the UK, and it just felt like there was a separation there. So coming back into the Canadian situation, we also found there was various conflicts and ongoing challenges in the church, and I didn't realize at the time, I do now, that I really struggled with any kind of conflict. And so that was affecting me deeply on the inside, and I began to start feeling kind of hopeless. And in fact, for the first few months of 2008, I went really high. It was like I was just in love with Jesus, getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning, being really creative, painting all sorts of things. And that lasted a few months, and then it was like I just dropped like a stone. And within a few months, I was deeply depressed. And we didn't even realize how bad it was until the end of the year.
And as you fell into this depression, and as you said, you started to realize how bad it was as it continued on, you had experiences where you ended up overdosing on medication, you ended up hospitalized, and during that season, you were still trying to serve in a pastoral role. Tell us a bit more about that part of your journey.
Well, the positive part of it was that we come to Canada and to the church with a vision to build a team. We didn't want like a one-man ministry. We wanted to build a team. And actually, out of my illness, a team grew up around us. And it was incredible. And they were amazing. And so we saw a really kind of good side in that happening. But then the challenge for me was... sorry, I'm losing myself there.
Well, the challenge as you're experiencing that episode of depression, where you started to self-medicate at times, you ended up going through different processes and needing some help from a hospital.
Right.
Those moments.
Yeah, I didn't realize just how
How far you had gone, maybe?
how far I was going. And yeah, I began kind of turning to other things. Candy was a massive thing for me, Valentine's Day. Yeah, I would eat 1 kilogram of wine gums every week. I would get one of these big bags and I'd go through it. And I didn't even realize really that I was doing that, and that was one of the things that I was looking to, rather than God to help me in this time. And so there was a big hole that was there that was just being filled in all the wrong ways. And so I went down and down and down, and it was such a difficult time.
It's often when we're in the throes of mental health, we can't tell that we're as far along as we are.
Absolutely.
That's the reality for so many people who journey through mental illness. And, I think that people would just say, well, I didn't realize where I was at.
Yeah.
But Janet, you at that stage are watching your husband go through this journey. You've got the kids. How was that impacting you at that season?
Well, I think at the time, like, what we didn't realize was that how bad the situation was. And so when he eventually took an overdose, I didn't even fully realize that was what was happening. So suddenly he's in hospital. They kept him there the first time initially for 3 months. And I'd been a stay-at-home mum. We had 5 kids. I was a busy pastor's wife. And so suddenly, he obviously was laid off from the church then. I had to find work. And so I applied for all sorts of crazy jobs. But eventually I got work at a private Christian school, and didn't want it. But I'd said to God, I have no idea what to do. I don't know how to navigate this season. I'm in crisis. The kids are in crisis. So if you open a door, I'll walk through it. And he opened this door into teaching, which I'd come out of a long time before in the UK. And I thought, I do not want that door. But you've opened it, and I need to feed my children. So I started teaching and found that I loved it. And it was actually... it was a break from some of the chaos that we were trying to navigate at home as Mark was in and out of hospital. But most of the time I felt as if I was a single mum with 6 children, and looking after Mark was probably the most difficult out of those.
And I think something that's interesting about your journey, Mark, is that you had treatment-resistant depression. So you were going to the counseling, doing the medication, exercise, trying to make those changes in your life that would impact the depressive episode you were having, but none of that was working. How did that impact your faith in God and how you viewed God amidst all of this?
Well, I think the hardest bit was that normally I'm pretty intuitive about what's going on in myself. I can identify thoughts, lies, whatever it is, and I can understand that. But it was like I fell into this depression so quickly that I got to the point where I couldn't process anything. And so they were trying all sorts of different medications over a year. It just felt like hell, really. It was just like one after another. Could there be hope that this one might help? And nothing did. Any combination didn't work. The counselling, I just didn't have the thought processes to do it because I was depressed. I didn't want to pray. I didn't want to be around people. All of those things. I didn't want to read my Bible. I had no concentration. So even as a pastor, that was obviously in those last time that was difficult as well, because I was withdrawing from people, doing my work but withdrawing, and so that was such a difficult time. Yeah.
And Janet, in that season, you found that God was providing for you in supernatural ways. He was really being a husband to you.
Absolutely.
You have literal stories of God providing for your family.
Yeah. One of those was, so we had no money, and I was cleaning houses at the time, trying to just earn enough money to buy food on the way home. And it was my daughter's 16th birthday, and I said to her, what do you want to do for your birthday? And she said, I want shop-bought pizza. And I thought, well, that was quite a big treat in our house. And I thought, I have no money. But my habit was I would go out every single morning at 6 o'clock when my 2 little boys were doing a paper route, and I would pray they would deliver papers. And I'm out in the morning. I'm angry with God, because it just was so much chaos. And I said, and it's my daughter's birthday, and she wants shop-bought pizza, and I don't know what I'm going to do about it. And I looked, like it's 6 o'clock in the morning, I looked down on the grass, and there's a $50 bill. And I picked it up, and I thought, I guess that's the pizza. So we had pizza. And there were many, many stories like that through that season, particularly where God just turned up again and again and showed his closeness to me and the children.
And Janet, as those moments continue to unfold in your life, in 2015 you hit this point where you said, I'm going to a counselor. You were probably going to counselors, but there was a specific counselor. And that impacted you, and you ended up sharing with Mark in a certain way, and then that impacted him. God's always on the move. Tell us a little bit more about what happened.
So I'd often hit points where I just said to God, I can't do this anymore. And it was at those times that he reminded me of who Mark really was. Like, we'd been married for 18 years before he got ill, so we had a lot of money in the bank, we like to say, and God would remind me of those times. But this time in 2015, 3 things happened, and I like to think of it as a perfect storm. 2 of my girls left home for university. I had a situation at work that was very, very difficult to deal with, and I really wanted Mark's support, and he couldn't give it to me. And I lost my voice, and I was told not to talk for 10 days. I'm a talker. But what I realized in that place was, with the girls out of the house, and it was just me and Mark and 2 little boys, nobody spoke if I didn't speak. And it was just huge for me. So my counsellor had been saying to me for 2 years, you can't play tennis on both sides of the net. And I didn't really get it. I then got it. That I was doing so much to try and keep our relationship going, and I couldn't do it anymore. So I went to her and I talked to her about this, and she said, you need to tell Mark how you feel. You need to go and see The War Room, the film that had just come out, and you need to believe that God can raise the dead. So we went out for supper that evening, and I told him how I felt, and I said very clearly, I am absolutely 100% committed to us and our relationship. But if you can no longer do your side, I don't know where we're going to end up.
Didn't sound so clear to me.
No, he thought I was kicking him out. But I was very clear. The next day I went to see The War Room, and I began praying in a different way. And out of that, Mark's reaction, he was actually really angry with me to start with. But he then went and found a temporary job in a factory. That 3-day job led to 5 years working in a factory, and it began to restore our relationship.
Well, that's right. And in that factory setting, that's where you started to reconnect with God, Mark. And that's really surprising and incredible. But tell us a bit about that healing journey that God took you on.
Right. So, I come from a very professional family, so going into a factory really wasn't the place I expected to be, and it certainly wasn't the place I expected to meet with God. So I get this 3-day temp work, and it turns into these years, and it's like, as I'm doing it was a really monotonous kind of work, but it was really good for me because my brain had really slowed down and my mental processes weren't good. My memory was awful. But doing this, it began to revive me. It's like a sense of productivity each day. It's like occupational therapy, I guess. But I began to just spend hours and hours learning to worship again. And that was one of the most exciting things. And during our night shift, I could listen to teaching podcasts, so I felt I was at school. I began to pray and intercede, and then learn about the prophetic and start hearing things from God for different people, and it became really exciting. And so I kind of term it my Bethel, because that was so much where I met God, and I began to get excited about God again, and enjoying being with people, which I hadn't done for years. So there's a lot of great things out of that.
Oh, it's incredible. And you know, Mark, I know part of this journey then, Janet, you had to also rebuild because you've been a caregiver for so long. And you guys did courses together on trauma and healing your marriage. Today you have a wonderful life coaching, a ministry coaching actually, called Living Well Coaching. I love that. And you are sowing into other people. You are in a position living healed and always on the journey, I'm sure.
Always,
right?
Always.
What would you guys say right now, just as we wrap up, to somebody who's watching and they're saying, I don't know if my relationship is beyond repair. I don't know if my marriage can be restored. What would you say just in a moment, if you had right now?
I would say there is always hope. God is the God who raises the dead. And in the process, he changes you and he makes you more like Jesus. And that was my testimony. It wasn't just about Mark being ill, but actually there were things in me that needed to change. And I saw God's faithfulness, and it could have ended really differently. But I learned that he is good and he is faithful regardless of what the outcome is.
Yeah, and I think for me it was just a sense that what God began, he was going to complete. He spoke that to me before I got ill, and I had no way of making that happen, but he did it.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah. Well, Janet, Mark, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your incredible story. We're so thankful for God for what he has done in your life. Thank you for being